Today at 6, the King's visit to France this weekend is postponed after French unions plan more street protests on pensions. This was to have been the royal couple's first trip abroad since Charles became king, but domestic French politics have intervened. Violent demonstrations this week in Paris and elsewhere over President Macron's plan to raise the pension age without a vote in Parliament.
Et nous manquerions d'un certain bon sens.
We'd have lacked common sense if we'd proposed a state visit of His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort in the midst of the protests.
We'll be looking at how a visit that was meant to celebrate Anglo-French relations has turned into a major embarrassment for France. Also on the programme. School inspections in England will continue, says the head of the watchdog Ofsted, after a head teacher took her own life when her school was downgraded. How a Russian child's drawing against the war in Ukraine saw her taken from her father after her school complained. She hasn't been seen since. And Top Gear is parked up for the foreseeable future. The BBC stops filming the series after presenter Freddie Flintoff had an accident in December.
On BBC London, 2 men have been found guilty of robbing the boxer Amir Khan at gunpoint for his watch. Police are now warning that high-end watch thefts are getting more violent.
Good evening. It was meant to cement a newly warm Anglo-French relationship, but the planned 3-day visit by King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla to France this weekend has been suspended at the request of President Macron because of escalating protests and some violence over the French government's proposals for pension reform. The trip was due to have been the new king's first visit abroad, but President Macron said that with more protests planned for Tuesday, it would be inappropriate for the royal couple to travel. Mr. Macron's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64 has faced stiff opposition. But it was his decision to force through the reforms, bypassing a vote in Parliament, that has caused the storm. From Paris, here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
Tear gas, riot police. This is Paris at the moment. There are piles of uncollected rubbish in the streets and angry demonstrators on the streets, furious with President Macron over his plans to raise the state pension age to 64. Matters appear to be deteriorating, and next week's state visit by King Charles and the Queen Consort was clearly in the protesters' sights. So, from President Macron, a change of plan.
Je pense que nous ne serions pas sérieux.
It wouldn't have been serious of us, and we'd have lacked common sense if we'd proposed a state visit to His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort in the midst of the protests, the President told journalists. The 2 men met several times when Charles was Prince of Wales. After today's decision was taken, the President telephoned the King to explain that the first state visit of his reign would have to be postponed. So what should have been the glittering confirmation of a restored relationship with a ceremonial welcome here at the Arc de Triomphe will have to wait. Paris, quite simply, is in no fit state to welcome the King and the Queen Consort. The entente cordiale between the 2 governments may be back on track after the post-Brexit tensions, but on the streets of France, there is anger. And that's the problem. This was the town hall in Bordeaux last night, a building the King and the Queen Consort had been due to visit next Tuesday. And this was the National Assembly a few days ago, as France's Prime Minister did her best to explain why members weren't being given a vote on the pension reforms. The King had been due to address the French Senate. And this very grand building is the Palace of Versailles, where the state banquet had been planned for Monday evening. Hardly the right backdrop in present circumstances. The state visit to France will be rearranged. The visit to Germany will go ahead as planned. But Paris hasn't been completely denied the sight of King Charles. The local waxworks unveiled its version of a kilted king today. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Paris.
Let's speak now to our Paris correspondent, Lucy Williamson. Lucy, this is highly embarrassing for President Macron, and he's in a big political fight too.
Yes, he seems absolutely determined to push these reforms through and stand tough, which is why it is striking his admission today that the protests are bad enough that they might disrupt the royal visit. It should be said that the authorities here say it wasn't so much that there was a security risk, more a risk to the image of either the British monarchy or of France. But I think President Macron might well have had something of an image problem even without any incidents. At the protests yesterday, there were placard after placard showing him as a sort of old-style French king. And that's the message of the protesters here, that he's remote, he's undemocratic, he's out of touch. So meeting a real monarch, dining with him in the gilded palace of Versailles, was unlikely to dampen that kind of mood.
OK, Lucy, thank you. School inspections in England will continue, according to the Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, despite some calls for them to be paused after a head teacher in Reading took her own life. Ruth Perry's family say that she found the pressure of an inspection in which her school was downgraded intolerable. It's now emerged that Amanda Spielman went to her school for a pilot inspection in 2019 and that Ruth Perry had said the feedback then was glowing. Here's our education editor, Branwen Jeffries.
From an Ofsted inspection at this primary and the suicide of the head teacher while waiting for the report, a national debate has been released. For Ruth Perry, this was her first inspection as head teacher, but the BBC has learnt Ofsted inspectors made an informal visit in 2019. The Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman, was an observer. In a newsletter to parents, Ruth Perry said the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. After a formal inspection 3 years later, the school was rated inadequate.
Of busy work and busy playing.
Sophie Greenaway is a head teacher at a nearby school. Before that, she worked with Ruth at Caversham Primary.
It would have been soul-destroying, that word, inadequate, that her school, that I know is absolutely fantastic and a wonderful place to be. It's amazing. And to be defined in one word as inadequate, that would have, destroyed her. It would have done.
Ofsted said in a statement earlier, inspections are in children's best interests. Our aim is to raise standards so that all children get a great education. It's an aim we share with every teacher in every school. Inspection plays an important part. Ofsted added it includes checking that teachers know what to do if children are being abused or harmed. It was on the basis of training and record-keeping on safeguarding that Caversham Primary went from the top grade of outstanding to the bottom inadequate.
Ofsted inspections look at many different aspects of what's going on in school. Each one of those is given a grade. But at the end of the whole process, the school itself is given one single grade. And if there are failings in just one area, it can be marked down.
Head teachers' unions are calling for a change in approach.
It may be that you want to buy a mug off Amazon based on a one-word review, but if you're choosing a school for your child, then I think you want a lot more comprehensive view of how that school performs, what its strengths are and what its weaknesses might be.
So do parents in Leeds rely on Ofsted grades?
It doesn't really play much of a part for me, just because I'd rather go into a school to see what kind of feel we get for the school.
Well, you can't help to notice it, because when you're looking for houses, they use the Ofsted report as an indicator of what the area's like.
Change may be on the way for Ofsted. This debate will shape it. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News.
The BBC has halted production of the latest series of Top Gear after one of its presenters, Freddie Flintoff, was injured while filming in December. The corporation says it'll decide later in the year how best to continue. Top Gear is one of the BBC's most popular and widely exported programmes. The corporation hasn't commented on reports that the former England cricket captain has decided to leave the programme. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba has the story.
Freddie Flintoff has been a pivotal part of the Top Gear team since 2019.
It's a good one, Pad. track specials.
Together with co-presenters Paddy McGuinness and Chris Harris, he helped reverse the plunge in ratings that had followed the departure of Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond and James May 4 years earlier. His skill, enthusiasm,
I'm banging around, but it doesn't matter because this is for play.
and taste for adventure has made him a favourite with fans. 3.5 months after the incident at Top Gear's test track, few confirmed details have emerged, only that after an accident, Flintoff was treated in hospital for unspecified injuries. In its latest statement, BBC Studios says, "Under the circumstances, we feel it would be inappropriate to resume making Series 34 of Top Gear at this time." So, right now, there's certainly a degree of uncertainty over whether Top Gear, which is partly filmed here at Television Centre, will return, with or without Freddie Flintoff. But the BBC is likely to be unwilling to part ways with a show that, as well as having a strong UK audience, is sold to dozens of countries across the globe. It's also the world's most watched factual entertainment programme, currently shown in more than 200 territories. Even so, one past member of the team, former Stig Perry McCarthy, thinks this might be the time to alter the programme's format, whatever Flintoff decides to do.
Moving forward, if Freddie wishes to leave the show, I guess they will need another presenter. Have anybody, but just limit how you go about it. There's enough components within Top Gear that many people enjoy, that can be fun, that, kind of engaging. You don't have to be 10 tenths all the time in something to get that reaction.
The Top Gear team emphasises that health and safety procedures are followed at all times, and as far as the show's future is concerned, it says it'll make a judgment about how best to continue later this year. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
The Prime Minister has held talks with Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu in London. Downing Street says that Rishi Sunak told Israel's Prime Minister it was important to respect democratic values. Mr. Netanyahu is facing protests over plans to give his right-wing government greater control over the judiciary in Israel, as well as over its treatment of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. BBC News has found some of the biggest companies providing freelance doctors, nurses and other staff to the NHS have seen their incomes rise by tens of millions of pounds since 2019. 3 companies alone saw their combined income rise by more than £200 million during that time. In December, it emerged that a hospital trust spent more than £5,000 for a single shift from an agency doctor. Our health editor Hugh Pym is here with more detail. Hugh.
Yes, Rita, the revelations come at a time of increasing scrutiny of taxpayer-funded agency costs, with health leaders saying workforce shortages leave them no choice than to spend more money on freelance staff. We looked at financial records of agency firms providing temporary workers, including 3 of the biggest. Medax Healthcare, which says it's the largest supplier of locum doctors to the NHS, reported an 80% increase in turnover to almost £161 million between 2019 and 2021. ID Medical Group, which said it's the largest UK provider of healthcare professionals to the NHS, had a turnover of £145 million in 2022, 15% up on 2019. And Independent Clinical Services, which trades as Thornbury Nursing Group and Scottish Nursing Guild, had a turnover of nearly £273 million in 2021, up 77.5% on 2019. It says the NHS accounts for less than half of turnover. In response to our inquiries, Medax said, "We are proud to partner with the NHS to provide them with a round-the-clock supply of healthcare workers." ID Medical, which paid one of its directors more than £800,000 last year, said, "We continue our commitment to driving costs down further in partnership with the NHS through our broad range of sustainable solutions." And Independent Clinical Services said, "We recognise the strain the NHS and other care providers are under and proactively work with customers to support workforce provision." We asked one NHS leader to take a look at our data.
So this is the spreadsheet with our figures. Sir Julian Hartley has run hospitals in Manchester and Leeds. He's now Chief Executive of NHS Providers, representing trusts in England.
Well, I think these figures underlines the pressure that the NHS is under right now. It's the most operationally challenged time that I can remember in the service, and certainly all trusts are desperate to reduce those costs and indeed reduce the reliance on agency. If we were to spend that money on permanent staff, that would go a long way to supporting the agenda that we've got.
Agencies say they're helping the NHS by providing staff at short notice when needed, and it suits some of them to be freelance.
Many of the agency staff we speak to, they say that they do this because it's the only way they can get flexibility in their work. It helps them manage burnout, it helps them manage their work-life balance and all the other responsibilities they might have in their life, and they can't get that by being permanently employed by the NHS.
The NHS has its own official staff banks which offer extra shifts when employers have gaps to fill. The Department of Health and Social Care said spending was controlled by a cap on hourly agency pay and that a long-term workforce plan would be published soon for England. For health leaders, any plan which commits to more nurses and doctors and reduces the need for agency spending can't come a moment too soon. Rita.
Hugh, thank you. The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. King Charles's first foreign trip as monarch to France is postponed due to protests against President Macron's pension reforms. And still to come. A chorus of approval as the BBC singers are told they won't be silenced by budget cuts.
Later on BBC London, redefining the capital's links with the slave trade. There are plans for a new monument remembering the victims. And 20 years after her first hit, we catch up with Katie Melua on her new album, A New Baby.
A child's simple picture against the war in Ukraine has ripped a Russian family apart. The 13-year-old schoolgirl who drew this has been removed from her father after her school objected to it and reported her to the police. Her father is being prosecuted for anti-war posts on social media, and he now risks losing his daughter. Steve Rosenberg reports from the town of Yefremov.
This is the last time Masha Moskalyova was seen in public. Police had just detained her father for anti-war social media posts. Masha was taken to a children's home. It was on March the 1st. But the story began last year with a picture. 12-year-old Masha drew it at school. Glory to Ukraine, it says. No to war, as Russian missiles fly in. Then the problems started. Town councillor Olga Podolskaya says Masha's father, a single parent, contacted her to say the school, shocked by the drawing, had called the police.
Her father, Alexei, told me he was dumbfounded. Then the police began checking his social media. They told him he was bringing up his daughter in a bad way. The authorities want everyone to toe the line. No one is allowed to have their own opinion.
Alexei is under house arrest and not allowed to talk to us. Since Masha drew that picture, he's been charged twice with discrediting the Russian army. He could now be sent to prison. His lawyer says Alexei is distraught without his child.
Alexei is very worried about his daughter. He doesn't know what's happening to her. The social services seem obsessed with this family. I think that's purely for political reasons. The family's problems only began after the girl drew that picture.
We tried contacting Masha's school to get its side of the story. School number 9 didn't respond to a written request for comment. So we went along there. But were told, no, we couldn't come in. We tried calling. Same result. Across town, supporters of the family gathered in court. Return Masha to her father, it says. The local Juvenile Affairs Commission is taking legal action to restrict Alexei's parental rights. The Commission has yet to respond to our request for comment.
Alexei Moskalyov had wanted to come here to court, but he wasn't allowed to interrupt his house arrest to be here.
even though what's at stake is whether his rights as a father are going to be restricted and whether his child will be taken away from him. Local activists are doing what they can to help, buying food and supplies for father and daughter. But when we ask the Moskalyovs' neighbours what they think, they're reluctant to say. I'm scared to, Angelina says. I'm frightened to answer. Sorry, she says, I won't express an opinion. And that too paints a picture of today's Russia, of the level of fear. Dissent is unacceptable, punishable. What those in power here expect is people's support, no matter what decisions are taken. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Yefremov, Russia.
The race to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as leader of the Scottish National Party is entering its final weekend. The Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes and former Cabinet Minister Ash Regan are battling for the votes of around 70,000 party members. On a visit to a wind farm off the far north of Scotland, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer told the BBC the SNP is imploding. Our Scotland editor James Cook reports.
Keeping the faith as Judgment Day approaches for the SNP. Kate Forbes, a devout Christian, met Muslim worshippers at this Lanarkshire mosque in the first week of Ramadan and the last weekend of the leadership campaign.
My priorities are the people's priorities, and that includes tackling the cost of living crisis. It includes reforming our public services and dealing with poverty, and obviously making the case for independence, setting out how Scotland can be wealthier and fairer as an independent country.
It can be quite robust, and there has been some interesting moments, I think it's fair to say.
After Friday prayers at his mosque, Humza Yousaf was keen to play down the disruptive and divisive nature of the race.
And my message is a really simple one. If you want the next leader of the SNP to continue to build on that progressive agenda that has won us election after election, if you want us to have somebody who will build the team that will unite and deliver independence, then I'm the person that you should put as your number one choice.
Ash Regan, by contrast, plays up her role as a disruptor with this message for members.
If they're in the SNP because they want Scottish independence, they really only have one candidate to choose from, and that's me. I'm the only one that's got a credible plan for independence. I'm committed to that, and I want Scotland to work towards being an independent country as soon as possible, because I see that as being the best way that we can get the Scotland that we all want to live in.
The twists and turns of this contest have been compelling viewing for voters in Scotland, but it also matters throughout the UK. The SNP currently hold 45 of the 59 Scottish seats at Westminster, which means their pain could be Labour's gain. Sir Keir Starmer knows that, of course. He's here to highlight Labour's plans for renewable energy and green jobs, and also because he spies a political opportunity in the offing.
The SNP is imploding. I think everybody can see that. Whatever you think of Nicola Sturgeon, she was, a giant in Scottish politics, and I think there's a massive gulf between her and any of the candidates to replace her. And what that implosion has shown, I think, is that the SNP's run out of road when it comes to the case for independence, and that's shone a light on their record.
Why has Labour done so badly in Scotland for so long?
Well, we did well for a long time, and then obviously we've not done so well recently, and I take that in all humility. And I think Labour lost its way and got too far from voters here in Scotland, and that's why I've spent a lot of time in Scotland listening, engaging, talking about the future.
Forward to a Labour government?
Maybe, maybe not. What is clear is Scotland will be a key battleground in the next general election. James Cook, BBC News, Wick.
And there's more from James on the SNP leadership race in the latest episode of the podcast 5 Questions On, and that's available on BBC Sounds. Now, earlier this month, if you'd walked down Armada Way in Plymouth, this would have been the scene, over 100 trees gracing the route. But in the early hours of March the 15th, This is what local people woke up to after contractors moved in and erased them as part of a redevelopment scheme. Not all had been felled, though, and campaigners rushed to secure a last-minute court injunction to save the remaining trees, a move that was extended today in the High Court. Our South West England correspondent Jenny Kumar has been following the story.
Campaigners in Plymouth celebrating the news from the High Court.
Brilliant.
Overwhelmed by feelings of joy.
I feel relieved. I'm devastated. Look at this apocalypse that they've created here, but at least we've got a little bit of a stay, and we've managed to save a few trees. That's a good thing.
Contractors came late at night and wasted no time felling more than 100 trees in just a few hours for the sake of regeneration. At around 1 a.m, campaigners were able to get an injunction to stop the chop.
If you cut any more trees down, it will be a criminal offence.
By then, only a few trees remained.
Do you have anything to say to the people of Plymouth?
Plymouth City Council said the work happened at night for public safety reasons. In the cold light of day, the sight of the destruction left some feeling astounded and angry.
Today's ruling is a victory for campaigners, but the reality is more than 100 trees have gone and around only 19 remain. A final decision on their future will be made once a judicial review of the council's actions has been carried out.
The judge has ruled the council can now remove the litter of trunks and stumps, subject to an expert report. But the remaining court order means the council's regeneration plans are in doubt.
Our aim was to transform a tired and run-down part of the city centre and draw in further investment to support inner city living. Whilst we acknowledge people's concerns about the loss of trees, others in our city are very clear they want this change.
This is what the council aims for the city centre to look like as part of its £13 million revamp. The scheme was paused in February following a campaign against it. Today, the judge said he has serious concerns about the council's use of emergency powers to fell the trees. The council leader who authorised it is expected to resign. For now, though, a new lease of life for these trees, but their future is still uncertain and continues to be an emotive and divisive issue. Jenny Kumar, BBC News, Plymouth.
After a public outcry against its closure, the BBC Singers Choir has been given a reprieve. The corporation says it can continue performing while it looks at other ways of funding the group, which is the UK's only full-time professional chamber choir. The singers were due to be axed just before their centenary because of BBC budget cuts, as our media correspondent David Sillito reports.
The BBC Singers are part of British musical life for nearly 100 years. However, what began as the wireless chorus of 1924 didn't look as though it was going to make it to its centenary year. The BBC said it had to make cuts. The choir would close in September. However, there's been a U-turn. And in the queue for today's concert, there was relief that Britain's only full-time salaried professional choir has been saved.
It's something to aspire to, certainly for young singers coming up professionally.
I just read on my phone now that they have a reprieve and I'm absolutely delighted.
The country doesn't respect really how good they are.
It is, though, a familiar story. The BBC's budget has dropped by around 40%, but each time it tries to cut something, protest. The conductor, Sir John Eliot Gardner, said the planned closure was a scandal. 140,000 people signed a petition. What's changed is an offer from two as yet unnamed external organisations who've offered to help pay for the singers.
I don't see this as a U-turn at all, actually. What this is we are still going to deliver our plans, but we're able to do it whilst keeping hold of the BBC Singers, and that's a really good thing. I'm very delighted to be able to say that, and we're now able to do it by working in partnership with external colleagues as well.
Discussions are still ongoing, but hopes are high that the Singers' future is secure. They will definitely be a part of this year's proms. David Sillito, BBC News.
Let's take a look at the weekend weather now. Here's Louise Lear.
Hi there, Rita. It certainly has been a day of dodging the downpours today, hasn't it? Look at these mixed fortunes. This is Ranmere Common a little earlier on. Beautiful day, sunshine coming out. Just an hour later, look at this, threatening looking skies. We've had some real torrential downpours today. And you often hear us use the word bands of organised showers. And what does that mean? Well, this is the perfect example. Look how these showers have just been driven along by those strong winds in fairly organised bands of showers. They're being grouped together for longer spells of rain at times, and some of them heavy and thundery. We've had showers further north, closest to the area of low pressure. Under lighter winds, they've been slow moving as well. And all that will drift its way steadily eastwards and hopefully improve a little as we go through the evening and overnight. Temperatures will hold up, though. We keep quite a lot of cloud around through the night. And tomorrow morning, we start off with some sunny spells and hopefully fewer showers. Now, there could be more organised across Northern Ireland, into Northern England, down into East Anglia. Here, there's a weather front. It's sinking its way steadily south. But Wales and southwest England will stay mild. We'll keep some sunny spells, but just that little bit colder in Scotland, a sign of what's to come. So as that front pushes its way steadily southwards through Saturday night, it's going to bring some rain, but it will introduce cooler air, a northerly airflow set to return for the second half of the weekend and into next week. So we start off wet across the southeast, brightening up behind, sunny spells, but some of those showers in Scotland could turn increasingly wintry. It's going to be a cooler story rather than cold for many of us because we've still got that spring sunshine and it's got a bit of intensity in it now. So temperatures generally around 6 to 10 degrees the high. Certainly it's worth bearing in mind, don't forget that it will feel that little bit cooler, but actually it's the start of British summertime. Yes, the clocks are going to go forward during the early hours of Sunday morning. We all lose an hour's sleep, but daylight hours start to get longer. Rita.
Thank you for the reminder, Louise. And that is today's BBC News at 6. You can, of course, keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. From the 6 o'clock team, it's goodbye, but the news continues here on BBC One. Just now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Bye-bye.